There's something nobody tells you about solving a problem. Everyone talks about courage, about decision-making, about making a change. But nobody warns you that for Taurus, solving something almost always seems like the opposite. It seems like waiting a little longer. It seems like enduring another month. It seems like telling yourself that it's not the right time yet, that a detail is missing, that if you hold on just a little longer, everything will work itself out. And then an uncomfortable question appears, very quietly, almost unintentionally. What if this waiting isn't patience at all? What if it's just the most elegant disguise for the fear of taking action? You've probably heard this 1,000 times. Taurus is the sign that endures, that resists, that doesn't run away at the first sign of discomfort, and that's beautiful, even admirable when it serves a purpose. The problem is when that same resistance stops protecting and starts to imprison, because there's a huge difference between holding on through a difficult phase and simply forgetting that that phase should have ended a long time ago. Imagine a plant seedling. At first, the small pot is perfect. It protects the root, keeps the soil in place, holds the structure while it's still fragile. But the root grows, and grows some more, until it wraps around the pot walls, forms knots, squeezes itself, and yet continues to receive water every day as if nothing were wrong. From the outside, it looks like care. From the inside, it's slow suffocation. This is more or less what happens when Taurus stays too long in a job that no longer teaches them anything, in a relationship that no longer builds anything, in a place that no longer fits the size the person has become. The body feels it before the mind admits it. A tiredness comes that sleep doesn't solve. An irritation comes that has no clear reason. That urge to disappear for a whole day without explaining to anyone why. These are signs. But Taurus, trained to value stability above almost everything, learns to ignore precisely the signs that ask for change. And here lies the first mistake, confusing the weight one carries with the protection one receives. Every extra responsibility, every bond maintained out of obligation, every routine repeated out of fear of emptiness accumulates as if it were armor. But real armor protects without preventing one from moving forward. What Taurus usually carries without realizing it is no longer a shield. It has become an anchor, and the worst kind of anchor is the one that the person themselves chose, one day thinking it was security. Perhaps you felt this before, that feeling of being secure in theory and suffocated in practice, of having everything organized on the outside, your job, your routine, your commitments, and inside feeling that something is simply wrong without knowing what it is. This is not weakness. This is the body trying to warn you of what the mind hasn't yet dared to admit. And there's another detail that almost no one notices. Taurus rarely leaves a situation at the first sign of discomfort. They wait for the second, the third, the 10th. You wait until you have absolute certainty, until you have all the guarantees, until you feel there are no more hidden risks along the way. But this certainty never arrives whole. It comes in pieces, slowly, almost deliberately hidden, as if life wanted to test the patience of those who insist on staying. And while Taurus waits for the perfect guarantee, time continues to pass, and the situation that no longer serves continues to repeat itself, day after day, without major explosions, without visible crises, just that silent wear and tear that no one from the outside can perceive. There's a way to know if you already know the answer, but lack the courage to admit it. It's not luck that Taurus lacks to get out of the wrong place. It's the permission they never gave themselves to stop waiting for a perfect sign that may never come. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose speaks precisely to this blind spot that Taurus carries. The difficulty of exchanging the security that already exists, even if worn out, for a new yet unproven security. It doesn't promise any miracles. It helps to organize from within what Taurus already feels on the outside, transforming that constant resistance into direction, instead of letting it become another year lost in the same waiting room. If you've made it this far, it's very likely that some part of this story has stirred something you've been feeling but never put into words. This discomfort that's still alive now as you listen to this is no coincidence. It's the right time to do something about it before it becomes routine again and settles in, as always happens when the decision remains only in your head. The link is in the first pinned comment, but be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. And you, in the comments, what is the waiting room that you already know you need to leave behind, but haven't yet had the courage to admit out loud? The courage to admit it, even if only to yourself, in silence, without having to tell anyone yet. Because there comes a point where staying stops being resistance and becomes survival disguised as virtue. It's like holding your breath underwater for too long, thinking that enduring it is a sign of strength, when in reality it's just delaying the suffocation that's coming. At first, you can hold it in effortlessly. Then your chest starts to hurt. Then comes the dizziness. And even then, some people stay down there, repeating to themselves that there's only a little more to go, that they've already endured this far, that it would be a waste to give up now. Taurus does this with entire life situations. They endure a job that hasn't taught them anything for years, because they've already invested too much time to waste it by leaving now. They endure a relationship that no longer builds anything because they remember how good it was in the beginning and think that if they insist enough, it will go back to what it once was. They endure a routine that no longer makes sense because change takes work, and work, when it's not urgent, can always wait another month. But the body doesn't lie. It stores each month of waiting as an extra weight on the shoulders, an added tension in the jaw, sleep that no longer rests as before, and a moment arrives, almost always silent, when the body simply can no longer confuse survival with life. It stops pretending that everything is all right. And then, suddenly, what seemed like stability turns into a collapse that no one saw coming. But if you pay attention, the signs were there all along, one after the other, waiting for someone to decide to listen before it was too late. If you've ever experienced that feeling of suffocation disguised as stability, perhaps it's time to stop waiting for your body to scream louder. That's exactly what led me to research the subject further, and that's when I stumbled upon the divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose. This time explaining how Taurus can recognize the exact moment when enduring has ceased to be strength and has become mere fear disguised as patience. The last copies are disappearing quickly because those who read this usually recognize their own story within it. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. There's an image that perfectly illustrates the next step in this pattern, a very old tree with incredibly strong roots, capable of holding up an entire hillside without sliding, but with branches that stopped growing upwards many years ago. It's still alive. It still provides some shade, but it no longer grows towards the sky. It only deepens more and more towards the earth, as if it had decided at some point that security was worth more than expansion. This is what happens when Taurus confuses stability with stagnation. The strong root, which should be the foundation for growing higher, becomes an excuse to never risk any height again. At least here it's safe, and it's true, it's safe. But security without growth over time ceases to be comfort and becomes an elegant kind of prison, decorated on the inside to look like a home. The curious thing is that no one forces Taurus to remain so shallow. They themselves choose repeatedly to prioritize what they already know instead of what they could still become. And each small choice, staying in a dead-end job, maintaining a friendship that only demands and never adds value, postponing that project that would require a little more exposure, reinforces the same root, ever deeper, ever further from the sky that once made sense to pursue. What remains of a tree that only looks down? What remains is a tree that confuses survival with purpose, and that never truly knew what it meant to flourish, only what it meant to resist. And it is right here, at this moment when the root realizes how far it has strayed from the sky, that the most uncomfortable question of all resides. And now, what to do with this realization? Because realizing the pattern doesn't change the pattern on its own. And it is precisely at this point, between recognizing the problem and still not knowing the next step, that most people freeze and end up returning to the same old deep root, only now deep down, knowing that it no longer serves its purpose. Here's a truth that nobody usually says outright. Life isn't going to send you a formal warning saying it's time to change. There's no email, no message, no bright sign written in the sky confirming that now is the right time. What exists are small, almost invisible cracks that appear very slowly, the way a wall cracks first in a thin line that nobody notices, until the day that line becomes a hole too big to pretend it doesn't exist. Taurus, by nature, is great at ignoring small cracks. They prefer to trust in the structure, in the solidity they already know, in the idea that if they've endured this far, they'll continue to endure. And they do endure, for quite some time. But cracks don't disappear on their own. They deepen silently, precisely while everyone around keeps saying everything is fine, because from the outside, it really does seem that way. The problem is that when the crack turns into a hole, the decision is no longer yours. The dismissal comes before the planned departure. Illness arrives before the rest you've been postponing. The breakup comes before the conversation you've been avoiding. And everything that could have been resolved with a calm choice, made in your own time, now needs to be resolved hastily, in a shock, in the most painful way possible. If no one is going to warn you, who needs to pay attention first? The uncomfortable answer is only you, and only now, before the whole decides for you. It was thinking about this type of sign that I reopened the divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose, because it deals precisely with this skill that Taurus needs to develop, that of perceiving the subtle crack before it becomes a collapse, exchanging superficial security for a security built from within. This is the kind of understanding that separates those who only react to life from those who decide before they need to. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. There's a huge difference between getting off a boat using the ladder, calmly, choosing your own pace, and being thrown into the water because the boat is already sinking and there's no other option left. The final destination, in theory, is similar. You get off the boat anyway. But the journey to get there changes everything. The pain, the shock, the recovery time afterward, the feeling of whether or not you had any choice in the process. That's precisely the difference between a change made by decision and a change that comes as a collapse. When Taurus procrastinates too much without realizing it, they often exchange the first option for the second, not because they wanted the more difficult path, but because they spent so much time trying to avoid any risk that in the end, they ended up handing over the decision to circumstances to resolve for them. And there's a subtle trap along the way. While Taurus waits for perfect certainty to act on its own, it unintentionally increases the chances that change will arrive much more abruptly than necessary. The longer the crack goes unattended, the louder the crash when it finally gives way. What kind of way out are you unknowingly choosing for yourself now? Calm, in your own time, or a push in no one else's time? And this is where the whole story turns upside down. Because, until now, everything pointed to Taurus's resistance as the villain of the narrative, the reason why he delays, suffers, postpones the inevitable. But there's another, deeper, more difficult to see interpretation in the middle of the process. Sometimes, what seemed like delay was, in fact, preparation. Good soil doesn't accept just any planting as soon as it's plowed. It needs a period of rest, of reorganization beneath the surface, before it can sustain a truly strong harvest. Perhaps each month that Taurus spent just enduring that job was, without him knowing it, the necessary time to develop the skill he will now use in the next step. Perhaps each attempt to make that relationship work taught him by force exactly what he doesn't want to repeat from now on. None of that was wasted, even if it seemed at the time like too much time lost. This doesn't mean the delay was ideal, it means it wasn't in vain. What if everything that seemed like a delay was actually preparation? This question changes the weight of each month you still carry as regret. Because the ground you're standing on now, even tired, even uncertain, is already firmer than it was a year ago, precisely because of everything you've been through so far, and not despite it. It was precisely this shift in perspective that I found described with great clarity in the divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose. The idea that Taurus doesn't need to blame themselves for the time it took to get here, but rather learn to use this solid foundation, built without haste, as a launching pad, and not as an excuse to remain stagnant. Anyone who has felt this weight of being behind in their own life understands immediately what I'm talking about. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. There's an image that sums up everything we've covered so far. The harvest never appears suddenly. It only reveals itself after an entire season of roots working underground, in the dark, without an audience, without applause, without anyone knowing what's happening down there. From the outside, it looks like nothing is moving. Underneath, everything is already underway. This is how resolution arrives for those with a Taurus nature, not like a sudden snap, not like a miracle falling from the sky on any given Tuesday, but as the inevitable result of a silent sum. Each limit you began to recognize, each crack you stopped ignoring, each small choice not to repeat the same old pattern. None of this screams, none of this asks for applause. But all of this accumulates day after day until the moment when the ground simply no longer supports the old version of the story and a new, more solid version takes its place without asking permission. If you've made it this far feeling like you're still in the middle of the process without seeing any harvest in sight, it's worth remembering. The most important part of Taurus's growth always happens when no one sees it. Underground. Out of sight, in months that seem repetitive, but are actually the foundation. The situation you so desperately wanted to see resolved won't collapse on you like a sentence. It will gradually unravel, precisely as you stop feeding it with the same old expectations. You don't need a bigger sign than this. The simple fact that you felt throughout this video some discomfort with parts of your own story is already the root stirring beneath the earth, preparing to bloom. The resolution isn't waiting sometime in the future, distant and uncertain. It's already in motion now within each silent decision you've been making, even when it seems like nothing is changing. And that's precisely the deepest beauty of being a Taurus. Nothing is lost along the way. Everything that seems to take a long time is, in fact, the earth being turned over from within, preparing, with all the patience in the world, the harvest that only those who persevere to the end have the right to reap. And perhaps that's the most honest answer for those waiting to be pulled out of their own situation. No one will magically appear and solve for you what only you can resolve. But that's not bad news. It's actually the best possible news because it means that the resolution doesn't depend on luck, coincidence, or someone finally realizing your worth. It depends on what's already been silently stirring inside you since the first time you felt the discomfort and could no longer pretend you didn't feel it. It will be resolved, yes, but not because life will suddenly take you away from there as if you were merely a spectator of your own story. It will be resolved because each month of resistance, each recognized crack, each root you stopped nurturing out of fear was already building beneath the surface, the ground where change can finally take hold without threatening to collapse. You are not waiting to be saved. You are finishing preparing yourself. And when that preparation finally finds the right moment to appear, without haste, without drama, without needing any warning, it won't seem like luck to those on the outside. Only those who lived through each month of that silent wait will understand that it was never stagnation. It was always construction. And that, in the end, is what makes Taurus capable of overcoming any situation and emerging on the other side more whole, stronger, and finally free from the weight they once mistook for protection.